There is a powerful mechanism inside your brain that most people go their entire lives without understanding, let alone using. It's not about talent. It's not about motivation in the way people casually define it. And it's definitely not about waiting to feel ready. What I'm about to explain is a fundamental biological process, a system that once understood allows you to take control of your focus, your drive, and ultimately your outcomes. Your brain is constantly predicting what matters. It assigns value to actions, thoughts, and goals using chemical signals. Among these, one stands out above all others when it comes to motivation and progress: dopamine. Most people misunderstand dopamine. They think it's about pleasure, about reward after success, but that's not accurate. Dopamine is about anticipation. It's about the pursuit. It's about your brain saying, this matters, move toward it. Now, here's the brain hack nobody talks about. You can deliberately control when and how dopamine is released in your system. And by doing that, you can rewire your behavior when you constantly seek easy rewards. Scrolling, instant gratification, quick hits of stimulation. You're training your brain to expect high dopamine for low effort. Over time, this creates a mismatch. Real work, deep work, starts to feel unrewarding. Not because it is, but because your brain has been conditioned to expect more stimulation for less effort. But the reverse is also true. If you intentionally attach dopamine to effort itself rather than the outcome, you fundamentally change your relationship with work. Think about that carefully. Most people wait until they succeed to feel good. That's too late. The system doesn't work that way. If you only allow yourself to feel rewarded after achieving something, you create a long, painful gap between effort and satisfaction. And in that gap, most people quit. But if you learn to generate internal reward signals during effort, while you're struggling, while you're pushing, while things are uncertain, you close that gap. You make the process itself rewarding. This is not abstract. It's biological. When you acknowledge effort internally, even subtly, you trigger dopamine release. Not massive spikes, but consistent signals. And those signals reinforce the behavior. Now imagine what happens over time. Effort becomes something your brain wants more of. Focus comes easier. Discipline becomes less about forcing and more about alignment. Another key mechanism is attention. Your brain has limited attentional resources. Wherever you place your attention repeatedly, you strengthen neural circuits. This is called neuroplasticity. And it doesn't just respond to what you do. It responds to what you focus on while you're doing it. If you're working but constantly thinking about how hard it is, how long it's taking, or how you'd rather be doing something else, you're reinforcing resistance. You're training your brain to associate effort with discomfort. But if you shift your attention to the process, what you're learning, how you're improving, even the sensation of focus itself, you're strengthening a completely different pathway. This is the second layer of the brain hack. Attention shapes the meaning of effort. Now let's go deeper. Your nervous system operates on cycles. Periods of high focus followed by necessary recovery. But most people ignore this. They either overwork and burn out, or they underwork and feel stuck. The optimal approach is to work in intense focus bouts, where distractions are eliminated and then allow real recovery. Not passive distraction, but genuine reset. Because here's what happens. During deep focus, your brain engages specific neural circuits associated with learning and performance. Afterward, during rest, those circuits consolidate. They strengthen. This is when progress actually gets locked in. So if you're constantly interrupting your focus or replacing rest with low-quality stimulation, you're disrupting the cycle. This is why people feel like they're working hard but not moving forward. Now, combine this with dopamine. If you train yourself to enter focus states deliberately and you reinforce those states with internal reward signals, you create a loop. Focus leads to dopamine. Dopamine reinforces focus, and the cycle strengthens. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes natural. There's also a powerful role of friction. Your brain is designed to conserve energy. It avoids unnecessary effort. So when something feels hard to start, that resistance isn't a sign you shouldn't do it. It's a sign your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The hack is not to eliminate friction completely. It's to reduce the barrier to starting. Make the first step so small, so simple, that your brain doesn't resist it. Once you begin, something interesting happens. Momentum builds. Dopamine starts to rise, not because you've finished, but because you've initiated movement toward a goal. That's critical. Initiation is one of the most powerful triggers for dopamine release. So instead of focusing on finishing, focus on starting again and again. Now consider identity. Your brain keeps track of patterns, not isolated actions, but repeated behaviors. Over time, these patterns form what you perceive as identity. If you consistently act in a certain way, even in small ways, your brain updates its model of who you are. I'm someone who focuses. I'm someone who follows through. I'm someone who does hard things. This isn't positive thinking. It's pattern recognition. And once that identity starts to form, your behavior begins to align with it automatically. This is where the real transformation happens, because now you're not relying on motivation. You're operating from a system that supports your behavior. There's also the role of discomfort. Most people interpret discomfort as a stop signal. But biologically, discomfort during effort often indicates growth. Neural circuits are being challenged. Metabolic demand is increasing. Adaptation is happening. If you can reinterpret discomfort, not as something to avoid, but as something meaningful, you change your response to it. And that reinterpretation itself influences dopamine, because dopamine is tied to meaning. If your brain believes something is meaningful, it allocates more resources to it, more attention, more energy, more persistence. So when you connect your effort to a larger purpose, not in a vague way, but in a clear, specific way, you amplify your ability to sustain that effort. Now, let's address something critical: consistency. The brain does not respond to intensity the way people think it does. It responds to repetition. You can have one extremely productive day, but if it's not followed by consistent behavior, the neural changes are minimal. But small, repeated actions, done consistently, lead to significant rewiring. This is why daily habits matter so much. Not because each individual action is huge, but because of the cumulative effect on your brain. Every time you engage in a focused task, every time you resist distraction, every time you reinforce effort, you're shaping your neural architecture. And that architecture determines your future behavior. There's also a social component. Your brain is highly sensitive to social cues. It tracks what others value, what they reward, what they pay attention to. If you surround yourself physically or digitally with environments that prioritize distraction, you're constantly fighting against that influence. But if you expose yourself to signals of focus, discipline, and growth, your brain begins to align with those patterns. This doesn't require a complete life overhaul. Even small changes, what you watch, what you listen to, what you read, shift your internal state, and those shifts accumulate. Now, one more key point: awareness. Most of what your brain does happens automatically. Habits, reactions, impulses, they're driven by circuits that operate below conscious awareness. But when you bring awareness to your behavior, you create a moment of choice. That moment is where change happens. You notice the urge to check your phone. You pause. You redirect. That pause might seem small, but neurologically, it's significant, because you're interrupting an automatic loop and replacing it with a deliberate action. Do that enough times, and the new behavior becomes the default. This is the essence of the brain hack. It's not one technique. It's a system. You align dopamine with effort. You control attention to shape meaning. You use focused work and real recovery. You reduce friction to start. You build identity through repetition. You reinterpret discomfort. You create supportive environments. You practice awareness. Individually, each of these is powerful. Together, they're transformative, because now you're not relying on willpower alone. You're working with your biology. And when you work with your biology, instead of against it, everything changes. Effort becomes sustainable. Focus becomes accessible. Progress becomes inevitable. And the most important part is this: once these systems are in place, they continue to operate. You don't need to constantly push yourself. The system carries you forward. The system carries you forward. And when that happens, something shifts at a deeper level. You begin to experience a different relationship with time itself. Instead of feeling like time is something slipping away, something you're constantly trying to catch up to, it starts to feel like a resource you can actually direct. That shift is not psychological alone. It's rooted in how your brain processes progress. Progress, even in very small increments, is one of the most powerful reinforcers of behavior. When your brain detects forward movement, it increases dopamine release. Not because you've reached the end, but because you're on the path. This is why breaking large goals into smaller, measurable actions is so effective. Each completed step becomes a signal to your brain. Continue, but there's a nuance here. The way you measure progress matters. If your benchmarks are too far apart, your brain doesn't register enough reward along the way. You feel stuck, even if you're moving. But when you create clear, immediate markers, things you can complete within a focused session, you create a steady stream of reinforcement. This is how you build momentum that doesn't fade. Now consider the role of uncertainty. Most people avoid uncertainty because it feels uncomfortable. But biologically, uncertainty is actually a powerful driver of engagement. When outcomes are not fully predictable, your brain becomes more alert. It increases attention. It heightens focus. This is the same mechanism that keeps people hooked on unpredictable rewards. But you can apply it to your own work if you approach tasks with curiosity, genuine curiosity about what you might discover, what might happen. You tap into that same system. You transform what could feel monotonous into something engaging. Curiosity is not just an emotion. It's a tool. And when you combine curiosity with effort-based dopamine, you create a state where learning accelerates. There's also the concept of cognitive load. Your brain can only handle a certain amount of information at once. When you overload it, performance drops. Focus becomes fragmented. Errors increase. But when you manage cognitive load effectively by simplifying tasks, by removing unnecessary variables, you create conditions for deep work. This doesn't mean making things easy. It means making them clear. Clarity reduces resistance. When you know exactly what to do and exactly how to start, your brain doesn't waste energy on decision making. That energy can be directed toward execution. And execution is where change happens. Another layer to this is the role of your body. Your brain does not operate in isolation. It's part of a system that includes your physiology, your sleep, your movement, your breathing. For example, your level of alertness is directly tied to your autonomic nervous system. When you're in a state of low arousal, focus is difficult. When you're in a state of excessive stress, focus is also difficult. The optimal zone is somewhere in between, a state of calm alertness. You can influence this state. Simple things like controlled breathing, exposure to natural light, physical movement, shift your nervous system. They change your baseline level of alertness, and that baseline determines how easily you can access focus. So when you think about productivity, don't just think about tasks. Think about state, because state drives performance. Now, let's talk about failure. Most people experience failure as a negative endpoint, something to avoid, something that diminishes motivation. But from a neural perspective, failure is information. When you attempt something and it doesn't work, your brain updates its model, it adjusts predictions, it refines strategy. But this only happens if you stay engaged, if you disengage, if you interpret failure as a reason to stop, you lose that adaptive process. The key is to maintain effort while adjusting approach. This is where resilience comes from, not from ignoring failure, but from integrating it. And when you do that, something interesting happens to dopamine. Instead of dropping significantly after setbacks, it stabilizes. Because your brain still perceives movement, still perceives possibility. That's a different kind of motivation, one that doesn't collapse under pressure. There's also the issue of delayed gratification. Your brain naturally discounts rewards that are far in the future. It prioritizes immediate outcomes. That's a survival mechanism. But in modern environments, this can work against you. The solution is not to eliminate long-term goals, but to pair them with short-term reinforcement. You create a bridge. Each small action becomes both a step toward the future and a source of immediate reward. This dual layer system keeps you engaged, and engagement is everything, because without engagement, even the best strategies fail. Now consider the environment you create for yourself on a daily basis. Every object, every notification, every visual cue either supports your focus or fragments it. Your brain is constantly scanning for stimuli. It's drawn to novelty, to movement, to potential reward. If your environment is filled with distractions, you're relying on willpower to resist them. But willpower is limited. The more effective approach is to design your environment so that the desired behavior is the easiest behavior. You remove distractions not because you lack discipline, but because you understand how your brain works. This is not restriction. It's optimization. And when your environment aligns with your goals, consistency becomes easier. Now, let's return to attention, but from a different angle. Attention is not just about what you focus on. It's about what you ignore. Every time you choose to stay with a task instead of switching, you're strengthening your ability to sustain focus. This is a skill. And like any skill, it improves with practice. At first, it might feel uncomfortable. Your mind will want to wander. You'll feel the pull of distraction. But if you stay, even for a little longer than you did before, you're making progress. Those small extensions accumulate, and over time, your capacity for deep work expands. This is how you go from minutes of focus to hours, not through force, but through gradual adaptation. There's also an emotional component to all of this. Your emotional state influences your cognitive performance. If you're constantly in a state of frustration or self-criticism, you're creating internal resistance. But if you approach your work with a sense of challenge, something to engage with rather than something to endure, you shift that emotional tone. And that shift changes your neurochemistry. You become more open, more flexible, more persistent. This doesn't mean ignoring difficulty. It means relating to it differently, and that difference is what allows you to continue. Now think about the long-term trajectory. Every day, you're either reinforcing patterns that move you forward or patterns that hold you back. There is no neutral. Even small actions matter because they contribute to the overall direction. This is why awareness and intention are so important. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to optimize every moment, but you do need to be consistent in your direction, because direction over time determines outcome. And once your systems are aligned, once your behavior, your environment, your attention, and your neurochemistry are all working together, you reach a point where progress is no longer something you chase.